Wow. Do you see what's happening behind me here? There are hundreds of tomatoes growing, and these are just the ones that have started ripening in the last 7 days since the last harvest. And what's most shocking is how small of a space we're utilizing to get all of this bounty. And so today, I'm not only going to shed light on who the amazing gardener is behind this tomato jungle, but first we're going to talk through some of the tips and observations from this setup to help you get way more tomatoes in less space. So speaking of space, the first thing that I want to zoom in on is how little we're utilizing here. All of these tomatoes are being grown from 2-foot by 5-foot raised beds. So effectively about half of a 4-foot by 8-foot raised bed. That is a ton of production from such a small space. And so the first observation to make on that front is to plant densely. What we can see in this instance is that on each side there are 11 plants planted. So 22 plants growing in 20 square feet. So when you do your next planting of tomatoes, don't be afraid to be going at least 1 per square foot. And the important caveat on this, which is the next observation, is to prune your tomatoes. And so what we can see on this front is that all of that lower growth has been removed. But what's really fascinating about this setup in here is that 2 to 3 suckers have been left on each plant. Now, when we leave these suckers on the plants, they grow into new stems that are going to have flowers as well as tomatoes. And this really confirms my suspicion that there's a sweet spot when it comes to pruning tomatoes. And I think that that exists around the area of leaving 2 to 3 suckers on each one of the plants. That allows us to plant 1 per square foot and then have them growing vertically. But by planting this densely, we're able to get way more root zones going in the soil and pulling up all of the water and nutrients, which is why we're getting way more tomatoes coming off of these plants. However, if we are planting this many tomato plants and keeping a couple suckers on it, then the next key observation on this front is that the tomatoes need to be trellised vertically, and not just trellised vertically into one location. When we look in this greenhouse here, they are being tied in a number of different directions. And so the takeaway for me here is to not just be trellising in one vertical direction, but rather to think about it more in terms of diagonals. That is done so well in this greenhouse here, and I added it up. From the 2 beds, there are the 22 tomato plants growing, but when you add in the suckers, there are 65 vines that are trellised up to the ceiling here, which is why we're seeing so much incredible production on these tomato plants. So we've got 2 more tips, takeaways, observations to make, as well as touching on who the amazing gardener is that's created this tomato jungle behind me. But just before we get into those, if you're enjoying this video, getting a little bit of value from it, I really encourage you to subscribe to our channel here. We've got more than 100 videos just like this one to be taking as much of the guesswork out of gardening as possible, so that you can not only be growing amazing produce and vegetables, but really just feeling how great it is to be in the garden. So our second last takeaway here is to grow in a closed environment. So what we can see here is that we're obviously working with a greenhouse, which is a very ideal scenario for tomatoes because it helps keep it really warm. But I know that not all of us can necessarily afford a permanent greenhouse. So there's 2 alternatives to this. One is to buy more of a grow tent, and you can buy these on a couple of websites on the internet, and they're really only a few $100s. They're a really great, just kind of like temporary solution to create that ideal environment for tomatoes. And then the second option is to simply grow up against a wall, such as the side of your house. I'm going to explain why in just a second, but first take a look at these sunflowers that I have growing in my yard. They're doing okay. But just a few feet over, pressed up against the house, I've got the rest of my sunflowers, and they are 3 to 4 feet taller and bigger in height. And so the reason why they're growing so well is because that house, it's blocking the wind and it's trapping the heat in that area, creating a little bit of a microclimate for the plants that were growing in that area. So any of your warm weather crops, such as tomatoes, will really enjoy growing up against a structure like the side of your house. And then you can go even further by adding either wood or rocks down at the base, because these are going to absorb and hold on to a lot of that heat and then let it out as the evening cools, once again creating more of a microclimate for the plants in that environment, where it's going to be even warmer than just in the middle of your yard. So using either a greenhouse or a grow tent, or simply growing up against some form of a structure where heat's going to get trapped, is really going to help how the tomatoes grow. And now the final observation and takeaway here is to feed. tomatoes are huge eaters and huge drinkers. When we think about that tomato that we're harvesting and enjoying, it is basically entirely liquid. And so what that means is for them to be highly productive, they're going to be drinking up and eating up tons of water and nutrients from the soil there. So all of these tomatoes behind us here, they were all started by seed in our worm casting seedling mix. So they had nutrients and microbes right from day one. And on top of that, they were started indoors underneath our grow lights to get a good head start on the season. And then when they were transplanted into these raised beds behind me here, they were transplanted with both our worm castings and our 4-4-4 superfood. So this ensured that there was an even bigger boost of nutrients and microbes right in the root zone where the plant is going to be pulling from to put on all of its growth. And then lastly, on about a once per month basis, these plants have been getting fed with just a top dressing that's just been sprinkled around the base of the plant and then watered into the soil, which ensures that the plant always has enough nutrients around it. The way you want to think about it is that your soil is a bank account, and as the plant grows, it's going to be taking withdrawals from it, both in the form of water and nutrients. So the question to you then is, what are you depositing into your soil bank account? If there's nothing going in there, then that bank account is going to hit empty and the plants are going to begin to struggle. But if you keep on making deposits and investing in that soil, then your plants, they're going to have everything that they need and are going to be able to make those withdrawals on those really nice, hot, sunny days and ultimately result in you getting more and more tomatoes off of your plant. So the last piece to touch on before we wrap up is, who on earth does this belong to? And what's super cool on this front is that this is my dad's backyard. And it's really cool to be getting a bit emotional, sharing all of this because both my dad and my mom have been such huge inspirations to me, not just gardening wise, but business wise and life wise, and the life that they've built and created here. So to get to showcase a little bit of their backyard and what they've created here is pretty incredible. And this is like honestly just the tip of the iceberg. So they've got a whole area that's dedicated to just the vegetables and the fruits that they enjoy and then preserve through the winter. They've got a rose garden for really nice dinners in the summertime. And then a separate garden just beneath their property here that's actually on a piece of public land that they've really beautified and taken over, but it's now completely open to the public, that has a really special meaning and connection behind it. And so if you'd ever be interested in me going on kind of a larger garden tour with the two of them, we might have to try and convince them to get in front of the camera here or something like that. But if you'd like to see more of what they've got going on and what they've created here, let me know down in the comments because it's something that's pretty special. But all that to say, this tomato setup right here, it's really one of a kind. I've never seen anything like it, and it just produces so much. So I really hope that there have been a couple of takeaways, learnings, pieces of value for you in this video. If you have any questions on it, let me know down in the comments. Other than that, can't wait to catch you in the next video. See you soon.